Welcome to Women Don't Do That, where we empower you with inspiration, knowledge, and skills to redefine your boundaries and unleash your potential. I'm Stephanie Minton, founder and CEO of Beacon North Strategies and your guide. Small town girl turned CEO while navigating career, motherhood, ADHD, and chronic migraines. Our conversations range from interviews with visionary women to solo episodes filled with actionable insights. We are your hub for turning what ifs into let's go. Are you ready to redefine your possible? Let's get started. Our guest today is Christiane Fox, the recently appointed Deputy Clerk of the Privy Council and Associate Secretary to the Cabinet. With a distinguished career in the public service, including roles as Deputy Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, and Deputy Minister of Indigenous Services Canada, Christiane brings a wealth of experience and insights. In this episode, we'll discuss her inspiring career journey, the roles and responsibilities of the Privy Council office, and the most important issues facing the Government of Canada and Canadians. Tune in to gain valuable career advice, leadership insights, and inspiration for women aspiring to make an impact in their fields. Don't miss this opportunity to learn from one of Canada's top public service leaders. Welcome, Christiane.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you, Stephanie.
Nice to see you too. When we start the interview, I really like to unpack a little bit of who you are. So what does life look like for you right now?
Well, I think for now, I would say that, I have a pretty busy sort of household. I've got two girls, 17 and one who turns 13 on Friday, actually. And so right now, life looks like a lot of basketball. They're both basketball players, so a lot of running around different gyms, a little bit of soccer, and so running around to fields. And then last night was prom, and so that created a little bit of excitement in our household. But I try to balance kind of my work environment. We just finished a session on Parliament Hill, so the House rose last week. So it was about crunch time of
Yes.
School year, sport, end of session for work, and so kind of juggling all of that is sort of what my life looks like right now.
It feels like when the House of Commons rises in June, Ottawa takes a collective sigh of relief.
Absolutely. Like there's so much work that goes into an end of a session and getting things through the right committees and making sure we've got the right decisions going into the summer. So there's a different pressure that exists over the summer, but it does feel like everyone can just catch their breath a little bit.
And what does work look like for you? Do you work hybrid? Are you mostly in the office? What does that look like?
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much in the office every day. I think the work that I'm involved in, it just makes a lot of sense to be sort of in person, and I quite enjoy it. I believe in sort of teamwork and the interactivity that comes with being in the workplace. And so I think that we totally benefit from a hybrid environment. Like I find now, if you travel, and it's really easy to stay connected. And so those things are game changers, or even things that we can do from home when things pop up in the evening or on the weekends. Like I find the systems make it such that we can really connect, and that's helpful. But I think with all the briefings that we do on Parliament Hill and what's happening sort of in this building where I work downtown, it makes a lot of sense to be in person. So that's my day to day, and we have kind of a daily huddle with the clerk and all the kind of PCO senior team, and I find like it's just a great way for us to just connect. And some people connect in virtually, some people are in person, and then we just kind of go and spread out throughout the day to do what we need to do.
Sounds good. Can you talk about what motivates you to live your best life?
Yeah, like I think, so I'm a big family person. I talked about my two girls. I think they're probably the best motivation for me in terms of just doing what I need to do to be a good mom, to be, hopefully a role model for them in terms of how I kind of take on challenges, and how do I try to remain sort of genuine and true to kind of who we are as a family, and And so that's a big motivation for me. I also have a big motivation in terms of public service. I believe in Canadians, and I work in a system that, is responsible for serving Canadians. And so a lot of things that motivate me about sort of my day to day is hopefully having an impact on people. And I find that, in the work that we do, we can get caught up sometimes in Ottawa around, submissions or projects or proposals. And I think just being grounded in why are we doing this and how is it impact on individuals across the country, and connecting in a way. And I think that that's been a huge motivator for me throughout my career, is finding those ways to connect with people so that I can be better informed in doing my job here in Ottawa.
I love that. It makes me think about the connections in the work that I do professionally, which, is government relations, because often we're bringing those stories of what life is like on the ground in different parts of Canada and the issues that they think that the Canadian government should pay attention to or prioritize. So it's interesting, some of the synergies there.
Yeah, and there can be disconnect, right, between like the work that we do. I mean, my husband is a basketball coach, and sometimes, he grounds me in a way, because I'll be talking about, this happened at work and this happened, and then he'll look at me and be like, yeah, I don't think a lot of people care about that. And I'll be like, hey.
I know. There's so many times I feel like in the work that I do where I'm like, guys, we're not doctors. Like, it's going to be okay. Like, it's important. And some of the things that we do will have a really big impact on people's lives. But today, nobody's going to die, hopefully, because of directly, right? There can be indirect, right? If you're not prioritizing healthcare or different things, but just to remind people, like, it's okay. And, we work at high levels and we work hard, but you don't need to lay it all out every single day, because it's a slow slog rather than a race. I don't know what the sayings are.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
For those of you who don't know, what is the public service or civil service?
Yeah, so we are sort of a nonpartisan public service. So we serve the government of the day. So we support elected officials, the party that forms government, to execute on their priorities and their mandates. And so in the experiences that I've had across my career, I've been, I started quite a long time ago as a communications analyst with a department that was then called Industry Canada, which is now Innovation, Science and Economic Development, and started my career in communications. And then I took on more senior roles. And so, over the last few years, I've been the Deputy of Intergovernmental Affairs, during COVID, as we needed to respond to a global pandemic. I went to be the deputy at Indigenous Services Canada, which is probably one of the best experiences I've had in my career. I've been the deputy responsible for youth, for immigration. So in these roles, what we do is we give our best advice, nonpartisan, evidence-based advice to the government about the key issues that we face across the country. And then we execute on the decisions that the ministers or cabinet or the prime minister that the government makes, and we're responsible for the execution of that. And so I do find it's an enormous privilege, and I have met just incredible people throughout the work that I've done, both my colleagues within departments, but also the amazing leaders and people I've met sort of externally, which makes this role, I think, so important. And, there's always things that we could do better as a public servant. There's always things that we could learn from. But I do think that there's a key role for Canada's public service in sort of our bigger democratic process. And I think it's the important time for the country to be focused on that, just with everything that's happening around mis and disinformation and, trust in institutions declining. I think that we have a role to play to maintain and even regain some of that confidence into for Canadians.
I can really appreciate that, because I even find in the work that I do in government relations, lobbying, advocacy, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same thing. And even just the misinformation about that field or comparisons to the US, when we're highly regulated in Canada and it looks very different. And so I can appreciate that a lot because I can see it in my own field, and also knowing from working with people like you how important the work that you do is and how valuable it is. I guess to unpack a little bit more about the work that you do, I think a lot of people don't know what the Privy Council is, which is the department that you work in. So can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So the Privy Council is actually kind of a small government department when you think about sort of the scale of some of our big departments out there, health and immigration. So we are essentially the Prime Minister's department, and we are considered kind of a central agency. And a lot of our responsibility is to coordinate some of the major priorities and files that are occurring across government departments, and then give our advice to the Prime Minister. So we support the Prime Minister on a number of sort of policy files, everything from social files, economic, national security, support his international engagement. We also support all of the cabinet committees that exist, which are the decision-making committees of the Government of Canada. So I would say we sort of have a good sense of what's happening across departments. We cannot kind of be experts in every single file because we have that expertise. But we have, I would say we're, as part of a central agency, we have, I think, a really good perspective on how all the files kind of interact together to layer on our advice. And so it's a kind of a unique place to be in government. I spent a lot of time here in my earlier career in communications. I spent a good sort of almost 9 years here at PCO.
Oh, wow.
Some youth work as well as intergovernmental affairs. And then I went off back to a department. So this is like a return home for me. I was appointed deputy clerk back in January. So it feels good to be back. And there's definitely a feeling of energy, I think, in this building, and a feeling of democracy that I find unique in government for sure.
That's very interesting. So as the Deputy Clerk of the Privy Council and Associate Secretary to the Cabinet, for people who don't know, what would your job responsibilities be? Like, what do you do?
You know, it's so interesting because my kids asked me that when I came, you know, in the sense of I used to manage a department of immigration. So I had all the responsibilities for, you know, permanent residency, Canadian citizenship, temporary residents, students, workers, you know, our humanitarian responses so it was very clear sort of, and I ran the organization. So I was sort of the CEO for that department. And now I've come to PCO. And so there's the clerk of the Privy Council, who's our most senior public servant. And I'm sort of his, you know, his support. And so I work to coordinate the work of all of the deputies and give my advice to him, give my advice to the Prime Minister and to cabinet. But a lot of it is a bit of, I would compare it to a COO model, right? I'm sort of trying to help on some of the big operational files. Since coming, I've taken on a leadership role with the pay system. I'm looking at big IT systems review. I kind of jump in on key files that come to PCO and need a bit more attention, whether that be, you know, the potential border strike or, you know, so it's a bit of an operations crisis management at times.
Yes.
So my communications background actually has served me well in this capacity because I've had and support colleagues. And I think when things take on, you know, when an issue or a file take on a scope where it involves, you know, 5 or 6 departments, well, that's when I can kind of step in and help coordinate the town a little bit on kind of what we're trying to achieve and how do we get there, and sort of focusing on execution and operation. So it's a relatively new role based on what I've kind of lived in the past, but really enjoying it because you get exposed to a lot of different things.
Oh, I love that. It sounds so interesting. What do you think, as you're walking through some of this, are the most important issues that Canada is tackling right now? What are some of the big ones that we need to get right?
Well, I think as you look at sort of the kind of both the Canadian domestic context and also the global context, I mean, we are operating in a geopolitical space that is enormously challenging when you kind of look around the world. It's what's happening, and sort of seeing how Canada plays a role in some of these dynamics is, I think, really important. I think that, I talked about sort of myths and disinformation. I think that's another sort of, especially from a public service standpoint, a file that, we need to pay close attention to. I would argue that artificial intelligence is a key element that, as a government, as a country, it's both in our personal and our professional lives that it will reshape how we deliver services and also how we connect with people and how we, use technology. And I think that there's a lot of impact that will have across the system. And I think that would be one that I would be paying very close attention to. But I also think our economic and social context, like I think there are big reflections around climate change, around where we're going with energy policy. I think that we need to think about, our fiscal context. So, I mean, these are large issues that but I think as we sort of navigate the work that we do, and I think we need to navigate it in a place where we are taking a pretty inclusive approach to how we make decisions, and that means being reflective of Canada. And I think that's, as a public service, we've thought a lot about sort of the call to action to support our kind of Black employees and how we think about issues from an E&I perspective. Having spent time at Indigenous Services Canada, I will say that the reconciliation file is fundamental for the country. Some of my best learning experiences as a public servant was spent at Indigenous Services Canada, and I call a lot of Indigenous leaders across the country friends and mentors. And so how we navigate, all of these challenges, like it's enormous, but if you look at it in that way, it can be overwhelming. But I think if you look at kind of how we break it down, file by file, issue by issue, and how we make progress, I think that's the only way that I see as a leader that we can kind of see ourselves through it. There's got to be a long-term vision.
Yes.
Kind of what are some of the things that we can do that get us there? And it's not going to be done overnight, but we need to kind of show progress. And I think that, this is not an easy time for Canadians, for youth, for the country, but I think that it is also an opportunity for Canada.
Yes, it's the big messy problems. And it's so important, Christiane, to have people like you who are smart and thinking about these things, because so many everyday Canadians, right? You're just living your life. You're worried about the groceries. You're making sure you can pay for your kids' sports, and you're just kind of doing these things. But I always find it really interesting to reflect on, like, what keeps you up at night? And like, those are some of the things that keep me up at night. And right, I'm worried about the fiscal position of the country. I am worried that we have all this opportunity for our competitiveness that is being untapped, and like all of these random things that most people are probably not worried about. And similar to what you mentioned about having a communications background, I have a master's in international public policy. So as I see some of these global shifts and things happening, I'm like, oh, red flag, things happening. And you're really putting your trust in smart decision makers to lead us through these situations, because we are somewhat at a crossroads in many areas, and on the global stage at a very volatile time as well.
Absolutely.
I thought it was interesting that you mentioned AI. I have two really close girlfriends who work in the public service, one in Ontario, one federally. And I asked them to look at some of the questions. And one of them was like, I want to know about AI. I want to know what she thinks about AI. So it was like, you're on top of people's minds.
Well, that is great. No, and I do think when you think about artificial intelligence, like I think about, how will it improve service delivery? We not utilized it. I think that that is kind of how, the outward facing services, but there's a lot even internally that our public service would benefit from. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, I was having a conversation a while back now with Ed Clark, and he was talking to me about transitioning to AI. And sometimes there's this kind of reluctance in having the conversation with your own workforce, because people, they're going to be replaced. And I think the conversation that we need to have with our workforce is not about being replaced. It's about, what are the tasks that you are asked to do on a daily basis that you find are a waste of time or annoying, unless you to actually get that off your plate so you can contribute your best efforts to the highest priority,
Yes.
require attention and, human interaction. And so I think that if we tackle it this way, we will have better, I think, input from our public servants about how do you make this transition. And I think that we absolutely have to make it. And much as I think there's things we can do kind of internal to government, we also need to think about what external environment we're creating. So major investments in compute, but also safety and security. I think that
yes.
So that's one thing that keeps me up at night is how do we actually ensure that we're investing in the safety and security as much as the advancement of the technology? Because there are, I think,
there's tensions.
Exactly. And so it's exciting. And I think the rapid nature of the change means that we all, no matter where you work in government or have to invest in your knowledge and training. It's not just the IT folks, it's the policy developers.
Yes.
It's the correspondence unit, like everyone.
Yes. I think it's kind of on the AI front, it's something I think that will definitely take some time. So I jumped on learning about ChatGPT when it came out right away. And I actually have taught some courses on ChatGPT and AI in public affairs. And one of the things I noted that was really interesting is almost so I do some comms, but my specialty is lobbying. And almost everybody that came to the course was a comms person. I was like, this is so fascinating because everybody needs to be here and they're not, and they should be, and they're going to be left behind. And so I found that really interesting. And from that experience, I actually did go and do a session at the big event for finance people that work in public affairs that happens every year. There's like a conference. And I taught ChatGPT and AI in finance. And it was the second biggest training session that people attended. And so I was like, oh, that's very telling about where people's interest is. And so it's good to have smart people like you thinking about it too, because the private sector is running with it. And, so how can we take advantage? And as you said, be smart about it too. You talked a little bit about your career path, kind of some of the departments you've looked at. When you look at your career, what are some of the key achievements or professional milestones that you can walk us through?
That's super interesting. I think that when I kind of reflect on sort of the best moments of my career, I find that first, I always take great satisfaction when, working as a team, you can achieve something unique or deliver on a big priority. And I am very much, I'm quite type A, so I tend to work in a particular way. And I find that, when you work hard and you give yourself to an issue, like it's very satisfying. And it's not about, the result that you get personally. It's actually the outcome for the issue that you were working on. So there's a couple of things that I reflect on as, amazing learning experiences that will stay with me. I had a really kind of different path. My first deputy position, I was actually the deputy minister for intergovernmental affairs and youth. And the prime minister was my minister, which is a bit unique, right? Because he was the of those two portfolios. And so I sort of navigated sort of my first role as a deputy minister in that circumstances. And I learned a lot. And then I went on to serve other ministers. But those early days of being a new deputy and delivering on some pretty significant things, we did Canada's first ever youth policy, and we engaged across the country to submit their ideas on things that they wanted to see from government and their commitments. That was meaningful for me. I can remember we were at Carleton University with about 300 young people from across the country. We brought them to a summit, and it was amazing. And we all, part of it was about giving back to community. So at one point in the summit, we had people out and about the city doing kind of volunteer work at food banks and local youth centers, and just seeing all these young people in action across our community, like that was a huge moment for me. Being the deputy of Intergov during the pandemic and even with Indigenous Services Canada during the pandemic, those were really hard moments. But
yes,
together. We worked through, vaccines and PPEs and supports for youth when schools were shut down. And every single day, that group of deputy ministers across the country met. Every week the premiers and the prime minister would meet. And that really challenging time came with, a $20 billion package that involved all things related to the pandemic, economic supports, and the work there was enormously gratifying. But the two kind of portfolios that I think will stay with me the most is the work I did at Indigenous Services Canada. It was hard work when you talk about, the housing context, water advisories, youth mental health. These were tough discussions, but the amazing people that do work on the ground in community was eye-opening and rewarding. And I would argue very similar at immigration. When you go and meet a settlement organization that is welcoming Afghan refugees and asylum seekers and Ukrainian people who fled war, like those are heroes every day. And just to be part of that, to me, are all enormously successful sort of career moments because of the people that, we worked with to achieve what we needed to achieve. And there's, as I said, there's always more work to do in all of these things, but I can reflect kind of very positively on kind of what that meant for me and how I brought that back home to talk to my kids about what I saw and influence a little bit of their reflections on that. So those are some of kind of the things that I hold dear. That's for sure.
Yes, some very pivotal and challenging things, and also, like you mentioned, meeting some of the people through that made that experience memorable to a certain extent, especially I think about the pandemic. And I think I first met you when you were the deputy minister related to doing the pieces for youth, potentially. So it really is transformative and important work. And I can appreciate the challenge of doing it too, because I know as someone who does advocacy and meeting with government and having discussions throughout the pandemic, and you're trying to address policy and make change and deal with things, but you're also living some of the headlines of the pandemic at the same time. And so it was quite a unique and challenging experience, and very transformative. So I can appreciate what that experience would have been like for you. When you talk about some of your background, I know that you were an athlete at Carleton, and I want to know, we talk about athletics a lot and the benefits of that, but how has that impacted your career from being an athlete to what you're doing today? How does it impact you? How did it help you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's been a huge benefit to me as an individual, as a leader in the public service. I had the good fortune of playing basketball and soccer at Carleton, and I will say that just athletics and sports generally meant a lot to me, sort of personally. I was a really shy kid, and didn't speak out a lot. Did my sport in my school, but never really kind of came out of my shell. And I think that going to Carleton and the community that is kind of that Carleton Ravens community meant a lot, and it changed kind of who I was. And I think there's so many parallels between kind of athletics and varsity sport and what you need in the workplace. So I think about teamwork, like you are together with a group of people that you didn't necessarily pick. They're not necessarily your best friends, but you're all working together towards a common goal. So communications, collaborations, accountability for showing up and at practices, and even at times where it's tough, you show up. And I think that teamwork element has been a big driver of how I manage my career. I think it's about pressure and stress. I think that
Yes.
You're under pressure, and that is valuable in the workplace. Like, we are asked to do things that are difficult, and so tight deadlines, high pressure. I think there is some connections there to athletics.
Yes.
I think as a leader in sport or at work, like, you have to take initiative, you have to lead by example, and you also have to bring people along. And so how do you use kind of relationships and strategy? And I am competitive, so it is kind of part of my nature to try to try
Yes.
to win the day is sometimes what we say to each other when we leave the house. But I think the last thing I would say is just kind of managing your time. Like there's,
Mm,
studying and working and playing athletics, like you don't have a lot of time. And so how do
yes.
you your day? And even to this day, I still kind of work in fitness. You talk about this. It's part of, I think, what gives me my resiliency, and it's part of my to-dos. And I laugh sometimes because I have this list. It's really archaic. And after having spent some time talking about AI, I'm now going to talk about my little checkbox written notes of things I need to do every day. And it can be everything from brief the prime minister, go buy basketball shoes, get to the gym, chair a meeting, like all of those things. To me, like you have to manage all of these priorities, and to be a good leader, you have to be well, you have to be balanced, you have to be positive. And so I really credit sort of what I learned through sport, and I often think it's sometimes it's I wouldn't say undervalued, but I do feel it is fundamental to being able to succeed. It's not the only thing, but it is
Mhm.
enormously well to take on these roles.
Yes, I would agree with you as someone who was an athlete as well. And I think people really do benefit from those experiences, but often don't reflect on how it benefited them. Like I think that connection is sometimes lost. But if you take time, like when you were describing things, I think there's so many people that could have checked some of those boxes in terms of the leadership or communication or getting along with people and that competitive nature. I think a lot of people can identify with that. Ready to take your public affairs career to the next level? Join Beacon North Mentorship Academy and master the art of effective meetings, strategic communication, and policy analysis. Enroll today at beaconnorthmentorshipacademy.com. Don't miss our upcoming course, Lobby Like a Pro, Plan and Execute a Successful Lobby Day on July 4th at noon, led by expert instructor Andrew DeFore. It will also be recorded so you can watch it after. Learn from the pros and become a pro. Visit our website to sign up and secure your spot now. If someone was to ask you, what do you love most about your job? What would you say?
I think it's what I get most satisfaction from my job is being able to take on a big issue or a big challenge and come out at the end with a solution. And I think that, we're all sort of built in a way that we want to kind of deliver on what's before us, whatever that may be. And I think that when I have the opportunity to do that and do that in a way that I can be sort of proud of the outcome and have brought people along so that we're kind of doing it together, I feel like that gives me enormous satisfaction. And some of those issues are hard. Like by definition, what comes to PCO is usually things that need more attention, require a little bit more sort of effort to try to solve, right? Other things get solved within departments, or so I think the complexity of what we work on here is part of what gives me great satisfaction, is kind of how some of the things that we've lived through and then apply it and learn from it, or a new idea that we can sort of use to tackle a particular problem. So I think that that brings me great satisfaction. The other part that I've really enjoyed about this role is the clerk has sort of asked me to lead a conversation across the public service around values and ethics, and sort of why we are public servants and what unites us, and really going back to the fundamentals of what it is that we do and why we do it and the importance of that. And I will say that that conversation that we've had, and I think I've had over 55 or 60 engagements in the last couple of months with public servants, like everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to just learn about where people are at. And I'll tell you, the conversations, here in Ottawa are very different than the prison warden I met in Vancouver or the pay advisor in Miramichi, New Brunswick. Like the values and ethics and who we are as public servants is really what unites us. But we types of work. And so I think that I've actually really enjoyed this conversation, and I feel that it's the right time to be having it, just given sort of the public environment around public service. And I think I spoke about sort of that gaining or remain like that trust factor. And I Now more than ever, it is important for us to be grounded in what we do and how we do it, and have the ability to execute on what we set out as our priorities.
I think it shows great leadership to see the challenges and those external factors, and then to be doing some of that work internally is really important, because otherwise things just continue to erode and nothing changes or nothing gets addressed, or you're not thinking about it, and that thinking and feedback can take time.
Having the conversation with people has meant a lot to me and them, like the fact actually engaging and wanting to listen and learn and apply. Like, I think bringing people along to kind of what the objectives are has to engage them in a meaningful way. And if we don't do that, we're going to lose people, as you said, right?
Yes, I think so. Can you talk about, you've had such an interesting career, you talk about advising the Prime Minister. Can you share like a unique story, or like something you were involved in at an important time of history or something like that?
Oh, interesting. I can remember a few, discussions or roles that I've had. One would be in communications. I organized an event with the Prime Minister of the day around sort of recognizing our contribution to Afghan soldiers. So the National Day, which was on Parliament Hill, and it was a way to recognize those who served and their families. That will stay as a pretty meaningful moment in terms of my career. I was part of the team that worked on, child and family services, the implementation of legislation for Indigenous communities across the country, and what that is. And that has fundamentally changed the childcare system. And there's a lot of work to be done and negotiations to continue. But I think that is a fundamental shift for Indigenous youth that I feel quite proud to have been a part of. I talked about COVID. I think I will remember COVID in a way that, this was a historic moment for the country. It was unique in its, impact and length. And I think having spent months, if not years, working through the various components of our response as a country was quite meaningful to me. And I think I do see it as a real privilege to have an opportunity to influence decision by giving our best advice. And I think sometimes people, don't always appreciate that the role of the public service is to execute on a decision, right? And so you have an opportunity to shape it, but then you also have a responsibility to implement a decision. And I think that alone, in that role that I play, is also something I hold as part of, like, it's not a unique moment in history, but it's being part of something that is fundamental to Canada's democratic system. And kind of a few responses. But another thing that I never thought I would be as sort of emotional about is the first time I was part of a citizenship ceremony. So I preside, Deputy Minister of Immigration. You can preside over a citizenship ceremony. And it is one of the most beautiful things that you can be a part of, to welcome new Canadians, to give them their certificate, the day with them and their families. Like, it's just this amazing experience. And here's how sometimes you can combine sort of life and work. When I was at immigration, we had a big meeting in Halifax, and we wanted to do a citizenship ceremony. And at the same time, the National Basketball Championships were taking place in Halifax. So we decided, let's do it during halftime. We'll bring people in, we'll sing "O Canada" with the crowd. It was a beautiful event. And
I love it.
And some of the basketball, fans from Halifax or St. FX or Cape Breton or wherever they were from, they'd be like, I've never witnessed a citizenship ceremony. It was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And it's moments like that I just, you just feel so proud to be doing the work that you're doing.
Yes. Oh, that's such an important thing that you did, and an amazing thing to be a part of. I know for me, every time I walk by the Parliament buildings or walk into the Prime Minister's office, like, I still feel so lucky and so thankful and have such a heart for Canada. And I hope I never lose that.
Same, absolutely. I feel very strongly and passionately about kind of being Canadian contribution that we can have.
You talked about earlier your experience with youth. I know that it's something that you're really passionate about and that we've seen through your work this year. My partner and I, Natasha, I partnered with her for an event called the Next Gen, which was about professional development for people in public affairs. So and that's going to be an annual event. We're excited to do it again next year. But what advice do you have for young people who want to start working for the public service? Where do they find that information? What advice do you have?
Yeah, so I would say I always speak about the public service in terms of opportunity for young Canadians. You know, there's very few workplaces where you can work at the Canadian Space Agency and then go on a foreign posting and then work at Health Canada. Like there's so many facets of the opportunity that exists that I always encourage people to take a look. There's as students, you can apply to through the student program stream, which then you can sort of be bridged into various positions and work in various parts of the country. So I find that's a good piece of advice for people who are still students thinking about going in. There are kind of jobs posted regularly on jobs.gc.ca, but I think it takes a passion for public service. And you know, it's not advocacy work. It's actually about the delivery of government. I think that's an important distinction that young Canadians have to understand and appreciate when they join. And it is about joining something that, you know, serves Canadians, serves the government of the day and execute. And I think you have to be passionate about that. I also would give them advice to, you know, work hard and you know, leave no doubt, just kind of prepare for an opportunity to contribute. But it is challenging work in the spaces that we operate. So you know, knowing your files, trusting your instinct, asking tough questions. I think learning to brief is a skill that is really important, right?
Yes.
5 minutes to brief somebody, a minister, a prime minister on a key issue. Like, what is it do they need to know before they go into that discussion or that meeting? I tell them about the importance of investing in relationships, but also the other components of being a good teammate and being kind and having some fun and laughing. Like it is important in our workplaces. And so my advice is there is huge opportunity. It's a unique place to be and I think an important place to be for the country. And so I do wish that, you know, many people consider the federal public service. And I always tell my colleagues, it's important that, you know, we are all ambassadors of the public service. If we are community team or running an art class as well, like we speak about our work and part of that is what people will get from us in terms of their ability and willingness to join. And so I speak about it quite positively and I know that everybody's experience can be different, but I think that you know, having sort of the experiences that I've had and being involved in the things that I've been involved in, like if I reflect on some of those moments, I probably should have shared this earlier when you talked about some of the most unique moments of my career, but I had the opportunity to be at the Mandela funeral with the Canadian delegation.
Wow.
And with former prime ministers and seeing sort of the world pay tribute to someone whose life's work will have impacts for generations to come and generations that followed. It was enormously, you know, it was an enormous privilege to be a part of it. So it's stories like that that people can really reflect on to join something about impact and people.
It sounds very exciting. What about you shared this a little bit, but when we're speaking to women, what advice do you have for women in terms of career growth or career advice for them?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I mean, I've reflected on that. I think that the advice would be similar to a certain extent, but I think I would say a few kind of additional things. One, I think we have to stop waiting for the belief that we will be fully suited to a role and you know, in 100% prepared to taking on before putting our name forward. Like, I think we need to know that you will never know everything about a job before you take it on. So it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay not to know it all. It's okay to go in and learn a little bit and give yourself an opportunity to excel as a leader in that job or that organization. And I find that that's one thing that people tend to sometimes ask me, women tend to ask me, they wait until they're perfectly ready. And I just think that being uncomfortable is okay. I think that being genuine, being true to who we are is important. And I think no one's going to be somebody that you're replacing, or how the organization has been run over time by different people. And I think that that's a big, important part of being a leader, because I think that for people to buy in, they have to know you're genuine. They also have to care. And I think that that's important. I'm a big believer in people and relationships. And, you know, there's a great quote by Pat Summitt, who's a basketball coach who passed away, but she coached a longtime basketball coach in the NCAA in the US. But she said, you know, people actually don't care how much you know unless they know that you care. And I think because you could be the smartest deputy minister in town, but if people don't feel that connection, that genuineness, you will not necessarily get that buy-in. And so that's really important. And it's not about being overly sort of emotional, or it's actually about caring about the people that work with us and that are part of our teams, and showing that. And I think that goes such a long way.
I truly, genuinely believe in everything you said. I think all of that is so important. And it's part of the reason why I do the podcast, because I want women to be able to see themselves in other women and their stories, and know that at every step when we did things, we didn't have it all figured out. And we learned along the way, and we took chances, and that hopefully they can see themselves in that space as well. I want to close off by asking you the rapid fire questions. Can you share a rule you've broken that turned out to be a great decision?
Yes. A lot of people have told me, don't get too involved. You know, you're a senior leader. You can't really get that involved. You've got people in regions, and you've got people in your teams. Trust them. And I do trust them. But I think getting too involved has helped me in many ways. It helped me develop relationships with people. It helped me do things differently. I can remember to connect with youth in a Northern Ontario fly-in Indigenous community called Attawapiskat. I ran a basketball clinic over a weekend just to get to know them and get to know the kids in a different way. I think that when there was the devastating situation of asylum seekers in Toronto streets last summer, I went to Toronto and met with people who were taking people in, or who were part of the faith-based organizations. Sometimes it can be hard and it can be messy, and getting too involved does come at some risk, but it's a rule that I'm really glad to have broken.
I love that. Who's a woman who continually inspires you?
So our former clerk, Janice Charette, is a woman that has inspired me for a long time. She's smart, she's tough, she's human, she laughs. She's been a big influence on my career. But I will always say that I am blessed to have a family of so many amazing women, and in a family where we were all raised and felt that we could be leaders and do what we wanted to do in life. And so I think that, that's important to reflect on, because family is a big part of who we are.
What's one book that has significantly impacted your wisdom and perspective?
So this will not surprise you after I've spoken about basketball so much, but I spent a lot of time on Kobe Bryant's Mamba mentality, because it's really interesting sort of leadership, and it has really good principles. And I'm a big Michael Jordan fan, but I read this book, and it stresses one of my fundamental beliefs, which is you have to put in the work and work ethic. You have to pursue things with passion and purpose, and you have to be fearless at times. And that's important for yourself and your resilience, but it's also important to motivate people around you. So I think that's one that it just had an impact in how I viewed, the time and the effort that I put in, but also the benefits of that and what it meant for me and the people around me.
Oh, that's amazing. Again, so much you can learn from sport. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for being here. And there's a lot of nuggets of wisdom for people to take from your stories and your advice. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's been great chatting with you.
Thanks for joining us on Women Don't Do That. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating or review. Connect with us on Instagram at Women Don't Do That and visit our website www.womendon'tdothat.com for more details. Join our Patreon to support our work. Find all of the links in the show notes. Remember, you have the power to transform your what ifs into let's go. Together, let's redefine your possible. Until next time.